How's it going, guys? Randall aka Shizukatz here on the Tressa's Collectibles channel. Today we're going to be looking at a Sword Art Online 10th anniversary build, centered around the Alice Level 2 Climax Combo. This is a deck that has been extremely dominant in the JP metagame, regarded by many as the #1 deck of the format. While the English version of this deck will be missing a few important pieces from Light Novel 10th Anniversary, which is a JP only set at the time of this recording, it's still going to be a powerful force in the English metagame. This is going to be a pretty long deck profile, as piloting this deck requires a very distinct mindset compared to your usual Weiss deck. So let's hop right in. The Alice Sao deck has multiple variations, but they all utilize the powerful level 2 Alice combo. So let's take a look at that first, starting with the level 2. This 2/1 Alice has 6k base power and gains 1000 for each of your other anniversary characters, bringing her up to a maximum of 10k on a full board. Her Climax combo activates upon placing her choice Climax in the Climax area, and lets you salvage any character or the Alicization event, as well as choose an anniversary character in waiting room and send it to stock. However, it does require having a full board of anniversary trait characters in order to activate. At first glance, this seems like a perfectly reasonable combo to play at level 2, allowing you to get back the cost of putting her into play, as well as getting an additional card out of it. Similar to other advantage combos played at level 2, such as Hololive's Kanata, Alice can really start to get out of control if you allow her to go unanswered, as the Sao player is potentially able to use multiple Alice Climax combos in consecutive turns. However, Alice is actually capable of doing all of this starting at level 1, usually as early as turn 3. This is the second piece of the Alice package, the 1/0 Alice Brainstorm. She has a Brainstorm effect similar to the Pachin and Payon pair from Tokyo Revengers. By paying 1 stock, you Brainstorm 3, and if the Brainstorm reveals a level 2 Alice, you get to put it directly on stage from the waiting room. This allows you to bring out the Alices at level 1 and start using their powerful Climax combo immediately, without even having to actually have the Alices in your hand to begin with. Additionally, Alice Brainstorm's on-play ability allows you to shuffle back 2 characters from your waiting room into your deck to make an opponent's front row character lose 1k power for the turn. This lets you put any 2/1 Alices from your waiting room back into your deck to reveal off the Brainstorm and summon to the board. As if that wasn't already enough, the Alice Brainstorm gives all of your other anniversary characters 500 power, making level 2 Alice's 10k power go even higher. In the first few turns of the game, you have 3 main goals: get 2 copies of the Alice Brainstorm in your hand, build enough stock to use for the Brainstorms, and mill your deck so that it's small enough to have a good chance of hitting 2/1 Alice on those Brainstorms. That's the super short version, and I'll go into further detail on how to achieve these goals as we continue in the deck profile. As far as ratios go, 4 Alice Brainstorms and 4 Alice combos are a no-brainer. I've seen some lists running only 3 Brainstorm, but I personally think that's incorrect, as I want as much consistency as possible to see 2 copies of it every single game. Now that we've established the power of the Alice combo, let's take a look at the level 3 options, of which there are many. The 3 main finishers you will see in the English versions of the Alice deck are the Argo, Silica, and Kirito variations. While all of these builds have their own strengths and weaknesses, the deck we'll be looking at in today's video uses the Argo finisher, making the deck a choice. Argo is a pretty simple finisher. On attack, Climax combo with choice, discard 2 cards to burn 3. This is further backed up by her Musashi burn effect. On the turn she's been placed on stage from hand, if her damage is cancelled, mill 1 and burn X, where X equals the level of the milled card plus 1. It's highly likely that between the burn 3 combo and her regular soul damage, one of them will be cancelled, allowing you to put even more finishing pressure on your opponent with the follow-up Musashi burn. The other 2 finisher options I mentioned earlier are the Silica and Kirito versions. Silica has a less aggressive ceiling than Argo, but can dig through the deck to find any missing pieces as well as get more fuel for her Climax combo. Kirito is a much more defensive build, having access to on-play heal and a suite of supporting characters that allow him to play for a prolonged endgame. With the Climax combos out of the way, let's get into the rest of the deck. I run 4 copies of the new Asuna level 0. On play, she gains 2k power if you have another anniversary character already on stage, and also has an ability identical to that of Hestia level 0 from Danmachi. She can look at up to 3 cards from the top of your deck for an event to add to hand, and if you added an event to your hand, you discard a card afterwards. This is one of the deck's main sources of mill, being able to go through up to 3 cards without any cost or potential downside. Another good source of mill is the Misumi Fukujiro. The Fukujiro profile activates when she's sent from stage to waiting room. discarding a card as cost to look at up to 4 cards from the top of the deck for a level 1 or higher card, which can include events. Unlike the Asuna, this Misumi can potentially miss, causing you to go -1, which is why the Asuna is given higher priority despite milling less cards. Additionally, Misumi can be denied by hard removal abilities that prevent her from hitting the waiting room. However, as a secondary source of free mill, she essentially plays the role of 5th and 6th copies of Asuna level 0. Misumi's second effect lets you give any of your characters +1 soul whenever you play an event. However, this isn't an ability that sees very much use since Misumi will usually be played on turn 1 or 2, while any events will typically be played on turns 3 and onward. Next up is our third source of free mill, the level 0 Administrator. She has an ability to clock herself from stage as cost, to look at up to 4 cards from the top of the deck, choose up to 1 level 1 or higher card from among them, add it to hand, and send the rest to waiting room. This is a similar effect to the Misumi Fukujiro, in that they both offer flexible mill and look for level 1 or higher cards. However, the major difference between the two is that Admin can be used on turn 3 without needing to commit an additional card to use her effect, whereas Misumi would need to have something played over her, resulting in an automatic -1. Admin also has a pretty useful secondary ability. On play, you can level swap for free, putting ideal level targets into your level zone or swapping for necessary colors. Up next, we have our most important recursion tool. It's crucial that you have at least 4 stock going into your third turn to use for Alice Brainstorms, so the Lifa level 0 is the best card to make sure you're hitting that threshold. Her first effect to discard 1 and salvage is a fantastic way to secure attackers that also doesn't cost any stock, while also filtering useless cards out of the hand, such as level 2 Alice combos, which we want out of our hand as much as possible. Her second ability is extremely useful as well. On play, we can put a card from our hand into stock. During the early game, this ability can be used to play through low roll games where we don't actually have enough attackers to get to 4 stock. Instead of fielding an additional character to attack with, we can instead put a card from our hand to stock, which essentially accomplishes the same thing. During the mid game, if your game is going well, nothing on your board is dying, and you have more cards in hand than you know what to do with, feel free to throw an extra Lifa onto the board to convert some of that extra hand into more stock. As one of the most important consistency tools of the deck, this Lifa is an easy 4 of. Now you might have noticed that none of the cards we've looked at so far use any stock whatsoever. We've put a lot of emphasis on having enough stock for our Alice pop-off turn, so ideally you would prefer not to pay stock in the early game if you don't have to. However, the Alice Riki is one of the cards on our level 0 line that breaks that rule. With her Riki effect, we can put the top card of our stock into clock to search our deck for a level 1 or lower character, which is important to help secure 2 copies of the Alice Brainstorm for our pop-off turn. While this ability does use a stock that we would prefer to keep for our Brainstorms, we can use Lifa level 0 to offset this by putting a card from hand into stock. The combination of Lifa plus Alice Riki ends up converting into a ±0 in hand, but we took 1 damage. In that sense, it's similar to the Ruijerd profile from Mushoku Tensei. Typically, you will see decks run 3 to 4 copies of their main Brainstorm. However, in this build, we're only running 1 copy of the Argo Brainstorm. The idea behind only running 1 copy is that we don't want to be using unnecessary stock in the early stages of the game, and the Argo is actually better used in our second deck rotation, so we don't need to find it early, and we can salvage it off of the Alice combo. Argo herself is a very strong Brainstorm though. In addition to being a rest self-salvage Brainstorm, she has 2 very relevant abilities. When we play any Climax, we can give 1k power anywhere until end of turn, and as long as she's on stage, we can play events without having the proper color. In this deck, there's only 1 event that realistically we will need color for, which is the Yuna anti-damage counter, but it's still nice to have that extra insurance in case the cards falling into our clock aren't going the way we want them to. Another 1 of utility piece is the level 0 Sortiliana. By paying 1 stock, shuffling 2 characters from waiting room back into the deck, and sacrificing herself, you can salvage 1 anniversary character from your waiting room. Like Argo, this is a card that, in my opinion, is best used in the second deck rotation. However, because her ability shuffles back 2 characters into the deck, she can theoretically be used in the first deck rotation to shuffle back 2 copies of the Alice level 2 combo to try to hit off your Brainstorms, although at the cost of 1 stock. She also has a secondary ability that forces both players to go down to 4 cards in memory if they have more than 4, which is pretty unremarkable text, but it's there. The last level 0 in the deck is the new Climax Swapper. Apart from being a Climax Swapper, it has on-play plus 1500 power. Notably, this card is red, which you might need in order to play the level 3 Lisbeth stock swap, so this can be sent to level zone if needed. Apart from the level 1 and level 2 Alices, the only other cards we're running at level 1 and 2 are counters and events, as the Alices themselves are the entire game plan at those levels. First, let's take a look at the Floating Castle Ironcrad event. This event is similar to a cigarettes or barrel event in that it mills through the deck without any stock cost, and then replaces itself with another card. However, it has a pretty unique method of deciding what card you can get. The event itself mills the top 4 cards of your deck to waiting room, then you count the number of soul trigger icons amongst those 4 cards, and salvage a character whose level is equal or lower than that number. This allows you to quickly mill through the first deck, while also potentially grabbing you important pieces such as Alice Brainstorms, if you already don't have 2 of them on hand. Otherwise, this card is always able to grab level 0s even if you don't mill any soul triggers. One notable downside of this card is that you are always forced to mill exactly 4 cards, so you'll need help from other cards with flexible mill, such as Asuna, Misumi, and Administrator, if you want to mill precise numbers of cards. Looking at deck lists in the past, I have seen this card run at 3 or 4 copies, but I just prefer to run only 3. Next, let's take a look at our counters, of which we have 5. First, we have the 1/1 Duzelbert counter from Alicization Volume 1. This is a vanilla 2500 counter, and we really just care about the power value here. The idea behind running this is just to have the best chance of defending Alice against opposing attackers. Coming out in May is the 1/1 Mito counter, which is a 3k counter with the cost of sending herself to the bottom of the deck. Since this counter gives even more power than Duzelbert, this is the preferred choice once she comes out. Apart from the Duzelbert or Mito counter, which we mainly run for power, we also run 1 copy of the Misumi Memory Kick 2k counter. Memory Kick backups can just completely screw up certain strategies that require full board or activate at the end of attack, so it's always a good idea to fit one in if you have a board that's even remotely defensible, which Alice definitely does. At level 2, we have the Gilbert counter from Sword Art Online Re-Edit. Despite neither Duzelbert nor Gilbert having the anniversary trait, they can both still be salvaged via the Alice level 2 combo as well as choice triggers, making them perfectly usable in this deck. Gilbert's an anti-change backup. By paying 2 extra stock and discarding 1 avatar or net character, you can send an opponent's character with higher level than the opponent's level to the bottom of the opponent's deck. Compared to the other available anti-change counter option, Yu-Gi-Oh!, this counter is the clear winner in my opinion, as he utilizes more stock than hand. Perfect considering our finisher uses a lot more hand than stock. You will want to be careful about the anti-change cost though, since you have to discard an avatar or net character, and there are a decent number of Fluct-like cards in this deck. Our final counter is the One of Yuna anti-damage event. This is a good last-ditch defensive option in case you're unable to secure a kill on your opponent, since the Argo combo doesn't use any stock during the attack phase. This means that you'll always end your attacks with 3 stock that can be used on this event. You do, however, have to be mindful of how much hand the Argo finisher uses, as you may need to discard the anti-damage counter as part of the cost. But by holding it in your hand until the last possible second, you might trigger a choice climax along the way so that you can keep it in hand to use defensively. While only running 1 copy might seem a bit sketchy, we have tools like Asuna, Misumi, and admin level 0s that can grab this event, and the high amounts of compression offered by the Alice combo can make the event a bit easier to draw into later on. Other variations of the Alice build, such as the Silica level 3 version, have an easier time finding the event due to running more abilities that dig through the top cards of the deck. At level 3, apart from the Argo finishers, I'm also running 3 copies of the Asuna early play. She can be early played if you have 4 or more anniversary characters on board, and discards 1 to heal to stock. Additionally, during her battle, if you cancel incoming damage, you can return her to your hand. The implications of this effect going off are pretty massive. If your opponent was trying to beat her, they failed, and they didn't do any damage, and you have a healer back in your hand. The floor of this card is already pretty good, and the ceiling is insanely high just because of this third effect. I usually like to bounce this card back even if the opponent was trying to crash a character into it. We can always run that character over on our own turn, and this gives us the opportunity to replay the healer. Sometimes, it's also best to keep the Asuna in hand instead of playing her back down, so that you can use her as cost for Argo finisher discards. Finally, I run 1 copy of the Lisbeth stock swap. On play, you can pay 1 to either stock swap your opponent, or give all of your characters 4,000 power until end of turn. The 4k is significantly more important in the Silica level 3 build as a way to avoid getting countered, so 99% of the time you're just going with the stock swap mode in this deck. As the only high level red card in this build, you only need to prioritize red if you think you might need to utilize this card in the current game. The game plan for this deck is unlike pretty much any other deck in the game. Honestly, Up until turn 3, playing this deck feels like a minigame. You're basically just playing to achieve your own personal goals and ignoring what the opponent is doing. Once you hit turn 3, this is your Alice pop-off turn when all of the magic happens. In the mulligan, you want to prioritize one copy of the Choice Climax, level 0s to use as playables, and Alice Brainstorms, as you will want 2 copies in your hand on turn 3. One of your main goals within the first 2 turns is to build at least 4 stock to utilize on Alice Brainstorms, and in order to accomplish this, you need to attack at least 4 times. Use the Leafa level 0 to secure more playables during that time, while also discarding unwanted cards out of your hand, and try to avoid using stock if you don't have to. If you need to use stock on a card such as an Alice Ricky or Climax swap, try to have a Leafa level 0 to use her hand to stock effect in order to get the stock back. Otherwise, don't worry about actively paying Climaxes out of stock, since our Alice Brainstorms will pay out a bunch of stock later. If you have Alice level 2s stuck deep in your stock, or even worse, in your level 1 clock, unfortunately those are going to be basically unusable for your Brainstorm turn, so you will have to make do with less than 4 Alices. In order to make sure they don't get stuck in your hand, you will want to get rid of them at every possible opportunity. Clock them at level 0 if you see them early, and discard them with effects such as Leafa level 0 and Misumi level 0 if you can. Your other main goal in the early game is to mill your deck in such a way that you can be at 9 cards in your deck at some point during your main phase on turn 3. The idea behind milling down to 9 exactly is so that you can shuffle back 2 Alices twice using 2 Alice Brainstorms, bringing your deck up to a total of 13 cards. You can then use Alice Brainstorm up to 4 times, which would bring you down to 1 card in deck, and then you can use Alice Climax Combo with a full waiting room of cards to choose from. Going into turn 3, you want to be very meticulous about how many cards you need to mill to get to 9, and what options you have to get there. Misumi Fukujiro mills up to 4, but is preferably played the turn before in order to set up turn 3 mills. Asuna mills up to 3, but results in a -1 if you hit triple Alice. Admin mills up to 4, but has potential to miss and clocks yourself. Ironcrad event can only mill exactly 4, but never -1. The timing on when I play my Alice Brainstorms depends on how many Alices are in my waiting room and deck. If all 4 Alices are in my waiting room, I will play both of my Alices immediately. However, if I have 1 in deck and 3 in waiting room, I will shuffle back 2 and then brainstorm until I have either 2 Alices on board or 2 Alices in waiting room as a result of milling 2 Alices off of a single brainstorm. At which point I shuffle back any remaining Alices and continue brainstorming. At this point, I consider 2 Alices to be a low roll, 3 to be a mid roll, and 3 Alices with 4 cards remaining in deck to be a high roll, as this would allow you to play your Choice Climax and still get the Climax into your waiting room before refresh. If you're only able to get 1 Alice or even none at all, you're in a pretty terrible position and are honestly pretty likely to lose that game. The deck basically throws bodies at the opponent for the first couple turns with the idea that the Brainstorms, Climax Combos, and Alice's massive bodies will just win all of the resources back. But if that game plan doesn't work out, the deck completely falls apart. When using the Alice combo, your waiting room will be filled with almost your entire deck, so you have many options to choose from. As far as salvages go, you should prioritize certain types of cards based on how you expect your opponent to react to your Alices. If they're playing a deck that you know will be able to defeat your Alices in combat even past counter range, you will want to grab cards like Argo Brainstorm or Sortiliana to get them back. If your opponent will try to contest Alices but will be within counter range, grab counters. If they have no chance at contesting your Alices whatsoever, you can go for greedy pickups like Climax Swapper, or just prepping for level 3 by grabbing Argo. Also, early play healer Asuna is a good consideration no matter how you expect your opponent to react. As far as what to send to stock, I typically prioritize Alice Rickies and Administrators, as they aren't really super useful later on, and they're also not avatar or net trait, so they can't be discarded for the Gilbert anti-change. Once you've finished all of your Alice shenanigans, congratulations, you have now officially finished the minigame and can now pay attention to what your opponent is doing. From this point on, keep an eye on your deck state to make sure you're in a decent position at all times, using Argo or Alice Brainstorms to mill through the deck when necessary, and eventually go in with your Argo finishers to seal the deal. Now let's talk briefly about how to counter Alice, since this is going to be an extremely prominent deck moving forward. The first and most important tip I can give to beat Alice is to keep up aggression. Alice is a deck that gets more and more ridiculous the longer the game goes, so you want to try to deal constant damage to them. If you can't beat their Alice board, ignore it and just go face. you don't have time to be noodling around and side attacking just because you can't beat their lanes. However, if you do want to try to contest their Alices, the number you should be trying to hit offensively is 14,000. 14k is the number you need to be able to hit in order to force a tie on Alice with Mito backup, as your opponent is not going to want to use a counter simply to tie, and will probably just give that Alice up. Additionally, running profiles that prevent the opponent from using backups is also very effective, as long as you can buff them enough to get them over Alice's power level. While this isn't so much of a tip because you can't really control it, just know that going first against Alice is a massive advantage. Since Alice is a deck that always wants to go off on their turn 3, whether you go first or second against them is the difference between having 3 turns of attacks or 2 turns of attacks before they have a chance to do anything significant. If you go second against Alice, usually that means you only have around 5 attacks on average, while going first means you can attack them 6 or even 7 times, which can be a massive difference maker. And that concludes our deck profile on the Alice build of Sword Art Online. If you guys want more info on one of the other Alice builds, I'll be doing a video for the Silica version that will be uploaded on my own channel later this week when we upload a gameplay video that features the Silica version. Speaking of gameplay, we've got a great lineup for you guys, featuring 6 different Sword Art Online decks, so be sure to subscribe to the channel and stay tuned for those. Until then, this has been Randall, aka Shizukatz, on the Tressa's Collectibles channel. See ya!